Hello and welcome back to my Linux, or it might be your first time I suppose. Welcome to my Linux YouTube channel where I'm posting free Linux tutorials as videos, some with PDF notes, and I've got several playlists. Look at the bottom there. This list is the ad hoc playlist. I've already posted 1 and 2. I'm about to post 3. And I'm working on 4 and 5. This is constantly changing as I think of new things to add. So I think a lot of people will be interested in number 6, recovering the grub, or recovering the root password if you lost it. How hard or easy is it to install Arch, dual booting Linux and Windows? That's what I'll be looking at next. But today I'm posting part 2, which is section 1, accessing the system, of my Linux command line for beginners and Windows users. These videos in the introduction playlist and the scripting and admin playlist all have PDF notes. If you've got any questions, do email me at linux@kenmar.fastmail.net. If you are looking at this doing section 1, make sure you've done section 0 first. Because in section 0 I show you how to set up the environment that we're going to use. This is my classroom on iF drive. So here, if you've seen it before, is section 0, which I've already covered, which shows you how to set things up. I've already shown you the main commands list, and Vim and Nano get by sheets, and today we're looking at accessing the system. My advice is download the file as I've done and open it as a PDF, which is here. This is my YouTube channel, and on here I've currently got 3 videos. The introduction, which is section 0, using Ventoy to create a USB drive and installing Ubuntu in VirtualBox. Obviously the one I'm recording is not on there yet, but it will be soon. So to make a start, don't need that. This is the Linux command line for beginners and Windows users. My name's Ken Mar. If you finish the course and you like it, that's I like the fact that you can highlight text, which is neat. Do let me have some feedback. And if you subscribe to the channel, then you get notifications when I post new videos. So this is section 1, accessing the system. These course notes have been test driven in the classroom over the years. I mean, there might be errors in there. Happy to fix them. If anybody finds anything, do mail me and I'll fix it. So this section, at the end of this section, you'll be able to log on to the system and run simple commands. We'll look at the history and structure of the operating system. We'll look at its advantages and disadvantages, how you change your password and confirm the change, and look at the various what are called shells available. So there's some blurb at the beginning, like there always is in these courses. So what are Linux and Unix? Most people are familiar with Windows. It's a popular computer operating system with a simple GUI interface. Linux and Unix are versatile operating systems found on many laptops and on business and scientific machines. They've always had some advantages over Windows. They used to be a lot more reliable than Windows are, but Windows has got better. And they're usually accessed via a command line interface, very similar to DOS if you use DOS on Windows. Both are available from many different sources and in many different flavors. Unix dates back to the late 60s and has been around since then. It was the first stable multi-user multitasking operating system for servers, desktops and PCs. Popular flavors include Solaris, which you used to get from Sun Microsystems, but now you get it from Oracle, HPUX and AIX. Linux, which I pronounce Linux, or some people pronounce it Linux, doesn't make any difference, is a Unix-like operating system developed in the 90s under the model of free and open source software development and distribution. So it was subsequently solely developed with the assistance of thousands of users via the internet, and has evolved into many independent distributions including Red Hat. CentOS is a derivative of Red Hat. Ubuntu and SUSE you might be familiar with. It's free, modern, open source, modular, it's stable. Like Unix, it's multi-user, multi-vendor operating system. Typical roles for Linux include as a server. Most of the big servers in the world you run on Linux. On desktops, on your PC, on laptops, on mobile platforms, since Androids actually run Linux, and iPhones run a version of Unix, and as hypervisors using virtual machines for networking and in cloud computing. A Linux distribution, although it's commonly known as Linux is just the name of the kernel, which is a piece of software that handles interactions between the hardware and end user applications. The expression Linux distribution, on the other hand, refers to a complete operating system built on top of a Linux kernel, and usually including an installation program, lots of applications like PDF viewer, the one I'm looking at, a file manager. This is Nemo, which I really like. I'm running Linux Mint on here. What I like about Nemo, one of the things I like, is you can split the screen with F3. So here I'm looking at my home directory, and here I'm looking at my classroom. So all these applications pre-packaged in an easily installable way, in theory, not always in practice. The desktop. A desktop environment is a collection of graphical applications that share a common graphical toolkit and are meant to be used together. So they're generally not used in servers. They usually provide things like I mentioned there: application launcher, file manager, web browser, email client. GNOME is one of the most popular, although I must admit I don't use it. I'm using Mint with Cinnamon here. They're installed on most of the main ISO images that you can download, like Ubuntu, CentOS, Red Hat, Kali, for instance. Recommended reading this book. Is preparation for the CompTIA Linux Plus certification, the examinations. But it's very good, it's very thick. I had a hardback copy. It comes with an included PDF copy of the book and lots of practice exams and videos and exercises, so it's very useful. On the course here there are lots of examples. Now they might not work on your machine. Most of them will, but some of them might. But they will all work in the supplied VirtualBox VM, which I showed you how to install in the last section, the introduction. There are handouts, the ones I just showed you. There are sample files, which you also got or downloaded, I hope, installed in the last section. And feedback would help. If you give me some feedback, either on Facebook or preferably via email, that will help me improve the course. So to get started, we need to log in. So I'm going to open a terminal. And tile it with superkey right there. I'm logged in as me, but I'm going to switch user. I'll show you how to do that later on. I'm not going to do it like that. I'm going to switch user into the user GenM. The password is GenM on here. And there's the FPT directory that we installed in section 0. If you remember, we also used VirtualBox, so there's CentOS, which I can open. I've left that logged in. That's what I like about virtual machines. You can leave them as they were. Oh, excuse me. And they come back as you left them. So again, I am in the user KNM. Simple way to find that. Tick up there. KNM. And those are the same files. So FBT is the only thing in here. That's what's in it. So if you're using Unix to log in, use your own user. If you're using the VirtualBox VM, log in as KNM. It says here with the password of KNM. You won't see the password. Now most of the examples in the course notes, because I used to run this in the classroom, so users would have the logins, train 1, train 2, train 3, going around the room up to train 12 sometimes. The examples in the notes use the username train 1, so in some cases you'll have to change that to KNM. Now what you get when you log in is a prompt. You get different prompts. This one has got home KNM. Actually, I think the other one's got the same thing. If I go back to, you can't do it like that. I can get it open like that. Yep, they've got the same thing. But you might see a $sign, you might see something that says bash, you might see your server name. We'll look at customizing the prompt later on. It doesn't really matter what it is for now. There will be a prompt. One thing to bear in mind though is that once you're logged in, the system is case sensitive. Usernames and commands are in lowercase. File names and passwords can be upper, lower or mixed case. And file names are case sensitive. So if you've got two files called by in lowercase and by in uppercase, they are different files. Now when creating files and folders, it's good practice not to use spaces. I never use spaces in file names on Linux. In fact, I don't do it on Windows either, because it just causes problems. As an example, if you wanted to create the file name red space hat, which is a valid Windows file name, you might have problems getting hold of that in Linux. So rename the file to red hat in lowercase, or use what's called camel case, red and hat with an uppercase R and uppercase H. Now Linux offers both a command line and a graphical user interfaces, so I mean running Mint you can do practically everything through the set of applications which are supplied via the menu, which you can get up with the super key. However, this course teaches the command line. One reason for that is that you can do a lot more in the command line. It's a lot quicker, and if you're working in industry, you don't often get a graphical user interface. You'll connect to a server somewhere through a desktop application. There's one called Putty, which is very popular, and you will only get the command line. So the course only covers the command line, but I'll be showing you how to use graphical tools as we go. Let's start with the shell. The Linux command line interface is created by a shell program. There are many shell programs available. If you want to see what shell you're running, echo $0, which gives you the name of the currently running program. And we are running the bash shell, which is, I think, the most popular shell and the default on many Linux distributions. Not on all of them. I think Arch gives you ZSH, which is a different shell. Oh, there's echo there. Now when a user logs in, the login prompt checks their username and password and then starts their default shell program. This shell then acts as an interface between the user and the system. It's a command line interpreter. So if you type a command there, like ls, it will list out my files. Actually, what I'm going to do is clear the screen with Control and L and CD, which we'll do later, into the FBT directory, and then I can deal with it directly. ls. So when I type ls, the bash shell interprets what I've typed at the keyboard, runs a command and puts out the output. There's a lot more on the shell later on in the notes. Every Linux system has a special user called root. This is the equivalent of the administrator on Windows. And this user should be used with care, because root has permissions to do anything, including delete anything. You can delete the operating system and it won't warn you. I know because I've done it. On here, a neat thing you can do on here is I can open a separate tab. Okay, and I'll show you switch user later. I'm going to switch into root with the root password on my machine. No, I'm not, because I don't have a root password on my machine at the moment. Beg your pardon. That's because I use sudo all the time on here, which is the default. I'll tell you what, we'll do it on here. So here I can, no, let's not confuse the issue. Let's do what I did before. Let's open another tab and switch user into root. The password on here is root123. Now you see the prompt comes up in red. Now normally it says here the default prompt is a hash symbol, but I changed it to be root, and I changed it to be in red just to remind me that I'm in root, because it's dangerous stuff to be in root. We'll look perhaps more at root later on. Let's come back where I was, do the same thing I did on the other user here. Change into FPT, clear the screen with Control and L, do an LS. Actually, if I were clever, see if I can be clever here. I won't tile down. If I bring that down like that, and I make this full screen, which you can do by maximizing it like that. So it's now just a little box, and I open the terminal I had open. I can take that up. Hey, isn't that neat? Now we can see them both. Clever. Now, command syntax. Most commands have the general syntax, the command, some options. The square brackets means they're optional, so they're optional options. And the file name, again, square brackets. With a lot of commands, file names are optional. Each element is separated by a space or spaces, and the options of file names are optional. Now you can run lots of commands alone. So here I've cd into FTP, FPT, I beg your pardon, and I've done the simplest command, which is ls. So ls there, ls here, the same thing. The home directory, it says, should include files similar to the following. So you've got a set of files, the same on both machines. Different colours I'll explain in a minute. Note that file names are case sensitive. So by there and by are different files. Same name spelt differently. So unlike many operating systems, just to reinforce the point, Linux systems are case sensitive. All commands are in lowercase. So it's best to work in lowercase and not have caps lock on. Now most commands take options. The simplest one with ls is -l, and what that gives you is a full listing of all your files. I think I'll work in the VirtualBox environment for now. You don't need to see them in both, it does work in both. There we go. So what you get when you do an ls -l, in the first column is a type of file. Now hyphen is a flat file. It might be a text, a script file, an executable binary file. An L, which you might not have on your system, including within the VM, because I just put one in to show you what it was. That's the only difference I made. An L is a link to another file. A D is a directory. So these are directories. And you can also see C's and B's depending on what directory you look at. character and block devices. So these are the most common ones that you see as a user. A hyphen, an L and a D. And the colours denote what you're seeing. So the blue ones are directories. So SCR and temp are directories. The others, nice, is a flat file there, but unlike all the other flat files, it's got executable permissions. So it's probably a program or a shell script. The same applies to buy. And the other one, the link comes out in this cyan colour. So it colours the three things. There's more details on that later in the notes. And what the link is, to save me typing in /file/log/app/history.log, I can refer to that file just as history. So it's like shortcuts in Windows. Now that doesn't show you all your files because you have hidden files. If you do an ls-a, actually this doesn't work like that. Silly me. Go back to your home directory, wherever you are. You'll see that one. Do an ls-a. There aren't any hidden files in FPT, but there are in your home directory. Hidden files begin with a dot, and they are special. For instance, this one contains a history of the commands you type in. This one's executed on logout. This one is really useful. This is executed on login. And several of these are to do with the GUI that we're running. Oh, more details on what's in those files later on. But for now, let's just know that they're there. Now you can combine the L and the A in several ways. You can do ls-a -l, and you get both. You get FPT comes up now, along with all the dot files. Whereas if we just did an ls-l, we would only get FPT. Now rather than -l-a, I would usually do -al. There are a lot of silly things on Linux, and one of them somebody wrote for people who can't spell ls and perhaps type SL, and he called this, oh, it's interesting, it's not there. Actually, I might have done that on purpose. Did I do that on purpose? Let me go back to, you know why? Despite what I said, I'm working in my user. I'm not working in VirtualBox. Give me a minute. Silly of me. It's exactly the same, but SL is included in here. So in here, if I type, go back to my home user, ls-a, there's my hidden files, different hidden files, because I'm running in VirtualBox on here, so I get dot files of VirtualBox, but there's SL. Now the reason it's not running on my machine is I'll show you how to install it. It depends what you're using. To install software in the virtual machine which is running CentOS, which is based on Red Hat, you use the commands. Well, the old command was yum. That's been replaced by DNF. I'm going to write a post on this. However, if I want to do it in my user, whoops, I'm trying, the reason it's piping 3 there is the cursor's in here. If it was over here, what I'm pressing is the super key and 3, and what that does, here's my hidden panel down here, it kicks off the third thing in the list on the panel, which is the terminal. So rather than going down there and clicking the terminal, if I remember to come out of there, I can press the super key and 3 and open the terminal. Now SL isn't there, so let's install it. You need to do it with root permissions, and you do that by using sudo. Again, I'll explain more about sudo later on. And rather than using yum or DNF, on Mint or Ubuntu based distributions you use apt. If you're using Arch, you use pacman. So apt, the syntax is install SL. It will ask, because I'm using sudo, it will ask for my password. Which isn't that. Sorry. Forgotten which user I was in. Is that? That's done. There's SL. You can actually get different trains if you give it -A. Like that. There's a different one. So we digress. Let's go back to here and look at commands with the file name back here. Actually, what I'm going to do, instead of all this flipping in and out of FPT, let's change into FPT. What I'm going to do is move all the files in there back into my home directory. If you're using your own user and you've got lots of files in your home directory, you might want to stay in FPT. But I'm going to move them back. I mean, within VirtualBox you can leave them there if you want to. It's a simple way to do it. You just say move everything, which is asterisk, in here to the current home directory, which is tilde. And we should find we've got nothing in there. And if we cd and go home, there's all the files. That's better. Otherwise I get confused because I've always done it this way in one file. It was only the way I was downloading the folder that meant it put them all in a folder. So, commands with file names. You can do ls on its own, you can do ls with -l. You can also specify one or more file names with ls, like old file and text. There's another trick here actually. If you, rather than typing oldfile, there's only one file there beginning with an O, so if I type an O and then press tab, it'll fill the name in for me. Now when it's slightly different. If I type a T, E, X, it will find text 1. But if I type T, E and press tab, nothing happens. Press tab again and it says, do you want temp or text 1? So you type in the first unique characters of the file. So if I put an X, press tab, there's text 1. Again, that's in the notes later on as well. But I'll show you these things as we go along, it's easier. So that just gives you an ls-l on those two files. We'll come back to ls later as well. Now here's some simple commands you can use. uname -a shows you what you're running. So this is, the machine is called, the host name is CentOS.train. That's the version of the Linux kernel that we're running. So host name will also return CentOS.train. If you don't know who you are, well, if you find a terminal unattended and you don't know who's logged in, ID is a good way to find out. What that tells me is the user login is kenm. Linux does everything by numbers, so there's my user ID 1032. I'm in a number of groups. I'm in the users group by default, but I'm also in the wheel group, which is what allows me to do commands with root permissions using sudo. And I'm in the staff group as well. But ID, you know, just to show you who's there. If you want to know who's logged on, you can use who. Now, you don't get much out of that on these machines because there's nobody logged on about except me. If I did it on my machine, remember to move the cursor here, and did who. I've got more things open, but not much. What you normally see, I'll show you what you normally see later on. You normally see a list of users, a list of IP addresses, that sort of thing. Let's shrink that. Let's shrink that. And we're back here. Okay, what's the date and time? Date. There is a time command, but what the time command does, it times how long it takes to run a command. So it will come back with the real user and system time taken to run the ls command. So if you want the time, you use the date command. So it's 28th September today, and it's 8:34. Other simple things it's got are a calendar. So you can type cal. That's this month. If you want a particular month, you can say, I used to use this to find out if it's a leap year. 2020 was a leap year. One reason that the bash shell is so popular is that by default you can use the arrow keys to retrieve previous commands. So you can go up arrow, down arrow, find the command that you previously did, go along and change it. So suppose I wanted the third month, and what you don't have to do is go back to the end of the line to run it. You leave the cursor where it is, it doesn't matter. That will run there. There are other shortcuts of the keyboard that I'll show you later on. The echo command can be used to display a message. So you can say echo hello, which isn't much use, is it? But you can also use echo to do other things. For instance, log name is the name of a variable, a pigeonhole that stores my login name. Now these variables can be accessed by prefixing them with a $. There are system variables which are generally in uppercase like log name, but when you're programming you can create your own variables and view them. So there's my login name, KenM. You can also find the shell you're running, which is the bash. The escape character is very useful. We'll come across that later on. The backslash escapes the character that follows it. So what happens if you do that is the $, is no longer a special character. So rather than displaying the variable, it displays $shell. Hello is okay, but we'll go back to there. If you want to display something, Figlet is better. Figlet displays like that in big letters. The FIG stands for Frank, Ian and Glenn's letters. Of course it does. You can change the fonts, and there are associated things with this. For instance, there's a jolly one called Cowsay. You can say Cowsay hello. You get a cow. Well, you've got to be able to spell. You get a cow saying hello. You can copy and paste from here. As I say, it's not recommended because you're supposed to learn things by typing them in, but we'll do it for this one. As well as a cow, you get a dragon. And what that does, that creates a file. We'll come to that later. If you want other fun tools, you'll find them there. In Linux fun commands. So if you haven't been typing along with me, the exercise there is try out some of those simple commands. So halt the video, go through the commands on the PDF file, and then come back and we'll carry on. Now next up is getting help using the man pages, the manual pages. If you want to know how to use a particular command, like ls, and you know what the command is, you can type man ls. And what you get is what ls does, it lists directory contents. The syntax or synopsis, so it takes options, which are optional, which is what the square brackets mean, and file names, which are optional, go in the square brackets. And down here you'll see all the different options. There are quite a lot. We've only looked at two, -a and -l. There's -a. Do not ignore entries starting with a full stop. -l's down there. Now, if I want to find -l, you can navigate this in several ways. You view the next page with the space bar, so we can page down with the base bar. There's -l there. Use a long listing format. You can go down the line with return, forward a page with F, back a page with B, search for things like -l with /, and this works in other utilities as well, -l, and it will highlight where it finds -l. Now we haven't got the -l as an option there, so we can find the next one by pressing N, and it will page its way through all the occurrences of -l until you find the one that you want. There it is. Use a long listing. It's on the previous page. It's on the next page now. There. To view the help screen within this is using a command called less to display the manual, the man pages. Press an H. There's a lot of help there. You get out of that with Q, it says at the bottom. And if you want to exit from man, press Q. There are a few other commands you can use. With man, for instance, if you know that you want to look at commands that do editing, you can say man -k edit, and it will find all the commands. That's because it's not installed. Let's try it. That's a bit naughty. Let me try that in here. Man -k edit. Oh, here it works. Oh, that's a bit odd. I'll have to have a look at that. I obviously haven't installed it. You have to install the man database to get that to work. So here are all the commands that have edit in their description. I think it's a simple thing to do actually. What you do is you do sudo catman. Put in your password. I don't think that worked. No, it didn't. I'll have to think about that. Sorry about that. But you can see what it does in my user here. Oh God, don't change workspaces. Press the wrong buttons here. That one. You can say apropos edit. You get the same sort of thing. If you can spell apropos, God, man's easier to spell, isn't it? There we go. And you can also use commands such as what is and which. I switch back to here. I can say what is. So if you want to know what is ls quickly. No, that's obviously not. That's not installed on here. I'll have to have a think about that and post a new version of the virtual machine. But for now, I'll run it on my machine. So here you can say what is ls, where is ls, and info ls. Well, info is like the man pages but different, and I prefer the man pages, but you get the same sort of thing from both. This is interesting. Where is ls? ls is in the bin directory. It's also in USR share man, so that's the manual pages for it. This is where the executable is. So when you type ls, it looks in the bin directory and finds ls. But the reasons why it's useful, it helps explain, for me to explain to Windows users how the directory structure works. So on Windows, for instance, you type in a drive usually. You might look for a directory that's got a space in it. That's not a real directory, but it doesn't matter. Now the difference between Windows and Linux is, on Linux you don't put spaces in directory names, and the slash goes the other way, and Linux knows where everything is. You don't need to specify C drive, tree drive, that sort of thing. So if you see that, it's a path name of where ls is. Everything's a directory up until the last thing, which probably isn't. Important keys. It's important, I mean, it's not as important as it used to be, but depending on how you connect, you might find that your backspace key doesn't work. It's very useful if you want to correct things. You don't normally use the function keys because they do things that are trapped by the laptop or the PC that you're on. You can use the number pad. Now I've got numlock off, so if I type on the number pad I get rubbish. However, if I put numlock on, I can type numbers. What's the theory? Didn't actually do anything, did it? Oh. Okay. I should say I never use the numpad, which is why I'm making such a pig's ear of doing it. There we go. But if you do, if you've got a big laptop or you've got a PC with a number pad, make sure numlock's on, then you can use a number pad. Control keys, these are useful. Suppose you've got a command which hangs, simple command that hangs is sort. Most commands take a file name or something, some options. Sort expects a file name. If you don't give the file name, it takes its input from the keyboard. So it's stuck now, and I can interrupt it with Control and C. That's what Control and C does. Control and D sends end of data, and a simple use of that is I can open, I've got a second terminal open here, I've got another terminal open here, remember the one that didn't work? I could exit from that by typing exit, or I can press Control and D, end of data, so you can use it to close a terminal, but it has other uses. Clear the screen, Control and L. Freeze the screen, that's minus L. You want to do this in purpose, but you might do it by accident, so if you press Control and S, I don't know if you can hear, but I'm typing at the keyboard and nothing is happening. To unfreeze the screen, Control and Q. That's what I typed. There are other control keys that we'll look at later on. Now if you want to change your password, you can do that. So my password is KenM. If I want to change it, I use pass WD. Most ordinary users can change their own password. If you're root, you can change everybody else's password. First you need to confirm that you're KenM, so you know somebody's not hijacked your terminal, which you've left unattended and unlocked, which you shouldn't do. And then you put in your new password. Now it's fussy about what you put in. Normally I only put in 3 characters, so I need a longer password, so I'll type QWERTY. password's too simple. You get 3 goes, I think, before it gives up, or of course you can type Control and C. If I go back to here, if this is locked, and you want to unlock it, you might have to put the password in. Password here is KenM. Try a new password. And at least you don't have to do it twice on here. That was shorter than 8 characters, so it's given up already. Let's try QWERTY again. I'm not sure whether it took that as a password or not. That's weird. Let's go back to a terminal and find out. Oh, I'll tell you what, let's log out. KenM, this is how you log out for the virtual machine. And then I'm going to log back in as KenM. No, I didn't change the password, which is why it came up and said error. Usually you get a message telling you it doesn't like the password that you've put in. There we are, we're back in the room. Right click there, maximize. So normally a new password has to be 6 or more characters and contain either numbers or special characters. And then if you want to log out of the terminal or leave the system, you can use exit or Control and D. And we'll go on to advantages and disadvantages. Oh, there's been another break in the video here, but I'm back again. Try now to paste them together, isn't it? That's another post I'll do. So, the advantages and disadvantages of Linux. Mostly advantages. It's multitasking. Many tasks can run at the same time. It's multi-user. Many users can be logged on at the same time. It's flexible. Utilities may be used as commands themselves, or they may be combined to form more complex commands. This is done using something called piping. Also, all peripheral devices such as terminals, printers, disks and tape drives are treated as simple files. It's secure. You should have a logon and a password to get in. Oh, excuse me. It's networked using TCP/IP. It features hundreds of utility programs. Come with a system. Depends what system you install, how many utilities you get. But there are loads of applications you can include if you want to. It's portable, it's written in C, a 3rd generation programming language, so it can run on all sorts of different architecture, including PCs, RSC and supercomputer processors. The 2 main advantages are it's not user friendly. Commands typically perform some small task and may be combined to form a more complex task. However, it was written by technicians and commands rarely display succinct error messages. My favourite is, don't try this, is an editor called Ed. If I edit a file, like old file, it says there are 37 characters in this file, and if you type something it doesn't understand, its error message is ? And that's the sort of editor people used to use in the 60s. At least now we have visual editors. You get out of there with an uppercase Q. And it was perceived that there was no GUI interface. There is a GUI interface. I'm using a GUI interface. I mean, there's the menu here. I can find accessories, games, graphics, all sorts. But if you're working in an office on a Windows PC, your way into Linux will be through some sort of emulation software which will give you a terminal that looks like this. No GUI, so if you can't type with the command line, you can't do anything. But saying that, all versions of Linux come with a default GUI. I think GNOME is one of the most popular. Now the basic structure of Linux is a series of layers. It's like a nut. In the centre of the nut is the kernel. Round the kernel sits the shell. The user sits up here outside the shell, and the hardware on the machine goes here. So the hardware is the first layer. The kernel is the very core of the system. Sorry, thought I'd lost my highlight there. That performs low-level operations, schedules memory, jobs of memory, interacts between the hardware, the disk and the printers, etc., and the shell. The kernel contains a fixed number of commands and procedures and can be thought of as the skeleton of the system. Now when you log on, you start a shell. This is a utility program which interacts between you, the user, and the kernel to get to the hardware. So it's a command line interpreter, sits between the user and the operating system kernel, provides the command prompt. It can be thought of as fleshing out the skeleton because it can be customized. There are many different shell programs available. Bash is the default and one of the most popular, which is why I use it for teaching. They can all be tailored to provide a customized user interface, which is something we'll look at later on. You can also make programs with shell commands. You store them in a file, make the file executable, and you make a shell script. So I'll be running a shell scripting course when we finish this introduction course. And if you're looking down the layers there, the hardware, the kernel, the shell, the final tier is the user. If you're running some sort of X Windows system, that sits between the user and the shell. Now, different types of shells. Well, first of all, which shell am I running? Well, we saw that with echo $0, or you can echo $shell, or you can type PS, which gives you a list of commands running in your shell and your terminal. I suppose the only command we've got running there is the bash, plus the PS, which is just run finished. There might be more commands running for your particular user. You can find them by saying PS -u, which is like the -l and -a to ls, your user, CanM. Now I've got loads of processes running because I've got the Windows systems up. Now the first shell was the Bourne Shell. It was written by a guy called Michael Bourne back in the 60s for Unix, in fact, but was ported to Linux in the 90s. It's the original shell available. One problem with it was you couldn't customize it to any real extent, so it's now little used except by systems administrators on Unix machines. If it's still on Linux machine and you get into the shell rather than bash, and bash is just a command, so I could fork another shell by touching bash. Then I've got two shells running. I'm in the second one. If I exit or type Control and D, I go back to the first one. Now this original shell, the Bourne Shell, was SH. But what you'll find is if SH is there, it's actually not SH, it's bash. And you can tell that because the arrow keys didn't work in the SH shell, but they work in this one. So Linux is kidding us, really. Now more useful shells The next shell that followed the Bourne Shell was the Seashell, which came from Berkeley University, where people were writing C programs. It's very similar to the Bourne Shell in that basic commands are similar. You can get into it by typing CSH rather than bash, like that. And notice that the prompt changes. That's my username at the server name. And the prompt's changed to a $sign, but all the simple commands are the same. But the nice thing about this shell, compared with the Bourne Shell, was it could be customized. It contained facilities such as command history, aliases, and job control. There are, however, significant differences between the Seashell and the Bourne Shell. Oh, sorry about that, another quick break there. The cat jumped on the microphone and dropped it on the floor. This is not fixed, it stands on little legs, but I thought I'd leave it in. Whole human life is here. Sorry. What I was saying was there are significant differences between the Bourne Shell and the Seashell if you're writing shell scripts. Bourne Shell scripts don't work in the Seashell and vice versa. In fact, I don't teach the Seashell. Now the Bourne Shell is compatible with the next shell that Mr. Bourne came up with, which is the Cornshell. The Cornshell is backwards compatible with the Bourne Shell, but it contains the facilities, the nice facilities from the Seashell. So you can customize it, and you can do a command history, you can do aliases, and you can do job control. By default, the prompt is a $sign. You can get into it with KSH. There. There's a $sign. One of the big drawbacks of the Cornshell, however, and the Bourne Shell, and the Seashell, was that the arrow keys don't work. They do that. They do A, B and C and D if you go up, down, left and right. So we can get out with exit or Control and D. The bash shell came along next. Bash stands for Born Again Shell, and this is, well, it was the newest shell at one time, but there are other shells now, and is very similar to the Corn Shell, except, well, it's got more features, but at first glance it's very similar, except that the arrow keys work by default. So you can get commands back as I showed you before and change them, which is nice. You can also customize the prompt. Actually, I'm in the Seashell here. I can tell by the prompt. Control and D will take me back to my... If you're not sure, just type a PS. If you're back where you were, you'll only have the bash shell running. So you can fork another bash shell and you get back with PS. Which shell to use? So there are many shells. There's ZSH, which is more modern. There's Fish. ZSH was too colourful for me, and I don't think it's on here. It's the default on Arch, I think. And there's also one called Fish. These are supposed to be even easier to use. Like I said, I think ZSH was very colourful. If available, the bash shell and any of these others, ZSH, Fish, is the easiest shell to use when learning. If you've only got the Corn Shell, you're probably on a very old Unix box, because all Linux boxes nowadays have the bash shell. Right, here's the first review exercise. So what I'm going to do is do Figlet there. So we're having an exercise. There's a break in the video. So, only 3 questions. Display the following: a long listing of all your files, your user and group ID and the shell being used, the name of your server and a list of users who are logged on. Then examine the man pages for the date command and display the time as HHMMSS. The hint is use the command man date to find help. And then thirdly, if you want to, change your password and then log out and log in again to test the change. Be careful if you do that on your own machine. If you're doing it within here, that's fine. Within the virtual machine, it doesn't matter. So I'm not going to bother pausing the video because you can do that. I'm going to go on and finish off. There isn't much more actually to this section. There's some bits on the history of Unix and I think the history of Linux. When I used to do this, whoa, press the wrong key there. I tiled it and made it bigger as well instead of going page down, which is that one. Okay, there are 3 pages left. When I used to do this in the classroom, this bit at the end used to be self-study, so people could go away and read it themselves if we didn't have time to cover it. So you can do the same thing. This tells you where Unix was originally developed in '69, came out as System 5 Release 4, although there was a separate distribution developed at the University of California, which became BSD Linux. Microsoft had a look at it. They called theirs Xenix and then decided to dump it. More for them, I think. I think it became SCO Unix. Anyway, there are significant differences between all these systems at system administration level, but the command line, they're all the same. In effect, and nearly everything in Unix, say 99%, will work exactly the same in Linux and Unix. Linux is from a kernel created by the famous Linus Torvalds, the man who created this wonderful world for us. You know, give him credit where he's due. He was a student at the University of Helsinki. He was using a version of Unix called Minix, but he wanted to create his own operating system to run on PC architecture. So he had a kernel, but no programs. There was a guy called Richard Stallman. Before everybody, all you clever dicks pick me up on this, this is just a précis of what happened. He had programs, but no working kernel. So they got together and Linux was born. Because of the physical distances involved between them, I think Stallman was in America, they used the internet for development. That was just appearing at the time in the mid-90s. So it was crucial in Linux's development. Developers began writing drivers so that different video cards, cam cards and other gadgets on any computer would work with Linux, and they're still doing that today. Red Hat got involved and made it their goal to bring Linux to the point where it could be installed just like any other operating system. And it's proven to be a tremendously stable and versatile operating system, particularly as a network server. As a web server on corporate networks, its downtime is almost negligible. Its cost effectiveness has sold it more than anything else, because you have to pay for Microsoft Windows if you want to buy it, but Linux, you can put it on a home PC on a network server for a fraction of the cost of other companies' software. And then interesting facts about Linux that I like. Most mobile phones and Chrome OS are Linux derivatives. 97%, if not 100%, of the world's supercomputers run on Linux, including the ones used by NASA. SpaceX uses a special fault-tolerant design of Linux, etc., etc. I won't go into all of that. I should update this though. A bootable USB key running a select version Linux can easily be created using software such as Rufus Unit Booting, but I would recommend Ventoy, spelt like that. That's the easiest way, because with Ventoy With Rufus and UNet booting, you can only put one ISO on a USB stick. Just check my battery. It's running a bit low, isn't it? Says I've got a few minutes left. If you use Ventor, you can put multiple ISOs onto a USB stick. So I've set up a couple of sticks which contain things like Anarchy, which is an installer for Arch I'm going to write a post about, Linux Mint, the latest version, gparted, which you can use to partition your disk. If you've not seen any of my other posts, this is gparted. Sorry, that's not gparted. This is gparted. Back on my machine now. Gparted isn't installed then. And there's my password. There we go. Gparted can be used. Warning. It can't open display because I've changed users. If I go back there and do gparted, it's wonderful when you make things up. They don't always work, do they? Here we go. This time, there we are. There's my disk. So 5 is Mint. 6 is my home directory. 7 is Arch, and 4 is free at the moment. And if you boot from this ISO, you can reconfigure your disk. You have to be careful though, because if you change these drive numbers, it might not boot properly. The other one, this SuperGrub 2, you can use to recover your system if you lose the grub. So when you come back, after you've looked at the exercises, come back and press go, and I'll put up the answers. Right, so hopefully now you're back after having a go at the exercises, and here are my simple solutions. I'll supply a list of solutions later on. So this exercise is on commands. So along listing all your files is ls space -l. Your user ID, group ID and the shell being used you can find by just typing ID. This is a different terminal I'm using. I really like this one. It's called GUAKE terminal. You can install it and have it start up on boot up, and then you go in and out of it by just pressing a control T, like in this case it's F12, and it's persistent across workspaces as well. So if I change workspaces and go to the one with the Impress slides in, there's nothing in that one. The one where I'm using simple screen recorder to record, it comes with me. And you customize it by right clicking and going to preferences. So you can have it start up on this side of the screen, a different side. You can change the themes. Anyway, that's gone. We can bring it back again. So that's ID. ls-l, you remember. PS shows you process is running. The shell being used, or you could do echo $0 for that. Host name you can find with the host name command. Users logged on, the who command. This is neat, this. I split the screen here. You can split it that way as well if you want to. And then close that one. Actually, that would have been better for this, wouldn't it? Because you can see things down there. I didn't think of that. So if I close this one with Control and D, in here, I can actually show you ls-l. Used to be a bit bigger, really. Not sure you make it bigger easily, but never mind. You get the idea. Actually, I think I prefer it the way I had it. So I'll go back to splitting horizontally. There we go. So number 2, examine the man pages. Well, you can examine the man pages by doing man date. And if you look around in there, you'll find that you can get what we wanted by using plus, %h, %m, %s. It's not necessarily always minus and a letter. Sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's not a minus. But that, I copy it and paste it down here. That will give me hours, minutes, seconds. And lastly, if you want to change your password, type password, type your current password, type in your new password, confirm your new password. I don't want to change my password, so I can't break out of it, but 3 goes and it'll give up. There. So that's the end of this first section of course. I hope you enjoyed it and you'll come back for the next section, which is commands and concepts. Commands are concepts such as piping commands together and redirecting output to a file. I hope to post that perhaps on Friday of this week. This week, doesn't matter when it is there, does it? Somebody's reading it and it's old. That won't make sense really, will it? I suppose I should say when it was. Right, I hope to post that on Friday of this week. Today is the 28th, so that will be on the 2nd of October, and then I post the others weekly on a Friday. I'll also meanwhile be writing the ad hoc playlists and perhaps posting one of those a week. If you've got any suggestions for what you'd like me to add or write a post on, you can reach me by email. If you've got any questions, you can reach me by email. Please subscribe to the channel and you'll get notifications of when I post new posts. And that's the end for now. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.